The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and sweat. It was auction day again. Dozens of men in dusty boots leaned on wooden rails, their hats tilted low as rain began to drizzle. The heavy clouds swallowed the sun, casting the entire yard in a dull gray. In the center of the wooden platform stood a small, trembling figure, a boy with skin as pale as bone and eyes that reflected the storm above. He was no older than 10. Shackles bit into his thin wrists, leaving red rings on the skin. His hair, almost white, clung to his forehead, soaked by the rain. The auctioneer wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and barked, "Step up, boy! Stand straight!" The child obeyed, his legs weak but trying to stay upright. All around him, whispers slithered through the crowd like snakes in the grass. "Cursed," someone muttered. "Bad omen. Look at him. Ghost boy." No one called him by a name. He didn't have one anymore. He was property, something to be bought or thrown away. A mule with pale skin, that's all they saw. The auctioneer's voice boomed, strong for his age, quick with his hands, good for the fields or the house. "Bidding starts at $20. Silence. The boy's heart sank. He could feel every breath in the yard tighten around him. Eyes scanned him like he wasn't human. Some stared with fear, others with disgust. One woman in a bonnet clutched her chest and crossed herself, whispering a prayer. A man spat into the mud. The auctioneer forced a laugh, trying to keep the crowd warm. "All right then. 15. Still no hands raised. "He ain't natural," someone said loudly. Laughter followed. "Albinism," whispered a man in a brown coat, as if naming a disease. "Won't last a year in the sun. Not worth the trouble." Another shook his head. "Can't have him near the others." "Brings misfortune." Everyone knows that. The boy's breathing quickened. His fingers clenched around the cold metal chain at his wrists. The auctioneer's smile faded into annoyance. Rain dripped down his face. $10, he shouted. "This boy's strong. Someone make an offer." But there was nothing, just the patter of rain hitting wood. The boy looked out at the faces, rows and rows of strangers, none willing to reach for him. Not because they didn't need another body, but because they didn't want him. He lowered his head. The rain blurred his vision. His stomach twisted into a knot. He had seen other children sold before, healthy, strong boys snatched up like cattle. But for him, there was only silence. Rejection. The kind that dug deep, the kind that whispered, "You don't belong anywhere." A whip cracked behind him. The boy flinched but didn't cry out. The overseer barked, "Head up, boy!" He obeyed. His chin lifted, though his eyes were heavy with shame. The auctioneer leaned forward, voice sharp with desperation. $5. "Somebody, anybody, take him off my platform." A few men laughed. One said, "Might as well throw him in the river." "Won't fetch nothing." Another man added, "Or let the crows have him." The boy's heart clenched tighter. He remembered the sound of the river at night, the rushing water, cold and endless. For a moment he imagined being thrown in. Maybe it would be quieter there. Thunder rumbled overhead. Then, silence shifted. The crowd parted slightly as the creak of carriage wheels echoed against the muddy ground. A black carriage, larger than any he had seen before, rolled through the gates. Its windows were draped in dark curtains. Horses, strong and restless, pawed at the earth. A man in a tall hat jumped down, opening the door with a gloved hand. Every whisper died. Heads turned. The boy felt the air grow colder. Inside that carriage, behind those curtains, sat someone the crowd respected and feared. A woman's foot emerged first, wrapped in black lace. Then the rest of her followed. She was large, her presence filling the space as if the air itself made way for her. Her dress was heavy, layered with velvet and silk. Her wide-brimmed hat shadowed most of her face, but when she lifted her chin, everyone stepped back. The Mistress. That's what they called her. Mistress of the Hawthorne Plantation. She rarely came to auctions. She didn't need to. Her land was already vast, her slaves many, her money endless. When she came, it was for something specific, something she wanted. The boy's heartbeat stumbled. Her gaze fell on him immediately, not the others standing behind, not the auctioneer, just him. Her eyes, sharp as blades, cut through the rain. A man in the crowd whispered, "Why her? Why now?" Another hissed, "Don't look at her too long. She don't like it." The mistress didn't speak at first. She just stared at the boy with an unreadable smile. The auctioneer stammered, "Mistress Hawthorne." "A pleasure." She raised her hand, silencing him. Her voice was calm and slow. I'll take him. No bargaining. No bidding. Just like that. The crowd rustled uneasily. Someone muttered, "She wants the cursed one." Another shivered. God help him, the boy didn't move. His heart pounded like a drum. Two men stepped forward, unlocking his chains from the post and dragging him toward the carriage. He stumbled through the mud, his bare feet sinking with each step. Rain beat down harder. As the carriage door opened, the mistress tilted her head slightly. Her lips curved upward, not a kind smile. A smile that said she saw something no one else could. He climbed in. The door shut behind him with a loud, final thud. The world outside grew distant. No whispers, no rain. Just the sound of carriage wheels rolling through mud and the faint scent of perfume mixed with something metallic. Something cold. In the darkness, the boy realized something deep inside him. He had not been saved. He had been chosen. The rain hadn't stopped. It drummed against the roof of the carriage like hundreds of tiny fists, each beat echoing the boy's racing heart. The seat beneath him was softer than anything he'd ever felt. Velvet cushions, heavy curtains swallowing all light, but it didn't feel warm. It felt like being buried alive in silk. Across from him sat the mistress. She was larger up close. Her body filled the entire seat, wrapped in black lace and deep green velvet. Her pale hands rested on a silver-tipped cane. A brooch in the shape of a serpent clung to her chest. A faint scent of rose water mixed with something bitter like rusted metal hung in the air. She didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. Her eyes, dark and calculating, traced every inch of him. The way a butcher looks at an animal before the cut. The boy's breath caught in his throat. "Look at me," she said softly. The words were smooth, but not gentle, more like silk wrapped around a blade. He raised his head slowly, meeting her gaze. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The rain, the road, the world outside. "Good boy," she murmured, tilting her head slightly. Paler than I imagined, her gloved hand reached forward and touched his chin. Her skin was cold, almost colder than the rain. The boy flinched. She didn't seem surprised. In fact, she seemed pleased by his fear. "You're not like the others," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "You're different. Perfect." The carriage jolted over a bump, but she didn't take her eyes off him. Her voice lowered into something darker, something almost ritualistic. "They don't understand what I see, but I see everything." The boy didn't know what to say. His voice had been quiet for so long it almost felt like he'd forgotten how to use it. He just stared, small and trembling, like a lamb trapped in the shadow of a wolf. She leaned back slowly, folding her hands on top of her cane. "What's your name?" she asked, though her tone made it sound like a demand. He hesitated. I don't have one." A smirk crossed her lips, not one of pity but of amusement. "Of course you don't. Names are for those who are kept, not sold." The carriage wheels splashed through muddy puddles, echoing through the walls. A lantern hanging outside swayed, casting long, crooked shadows across her face. For a brief second her eyes caught the flame, and in that flicker something inhuman glimmered. She reached into a small box beside her and pulled out a folded handkerchief. Carefully, almost tenderly, she wiped the rain from his cheeks. Her touch was slow, deliberate. She was studying him, not cleaning him. "You will not be with the others," she said. "You're special." The boy didn't understand, but the way she said special sent a chill straight down his spine. She tucked the handkerchief away and gave a small, satisfied nod. Outside, the road grew rougher. He could hear crickets and distant thunder. The town had faded behind them, and the world was now trees, mud, and darkness. After what felt like an hour, the carriage slowed. The mistress leaned slightly toward the curtain and peered out. "Home," she whispered. The door opened with a creak. Rain poured harder, soaking the ground in thick mud. Two house servants, heads bowed and clothes drenched, stood waiting with umbrellas. They didn't look at her. They didn't dare. The boy stepped down, his feet sinking into the mud. Lightning split the sky, and in that flash he saw the plantation for the first time. The house loomed at the top of a hill, a massive structure of dark wood and stone. Vines crawled up its sides like black veins. The windows were tall and narrow, glowing faintly with yellow light. But some of them were boarded shut. Behind it stretched rows of shacks, fields and shadows moving in the rain. Slaves working even now, but none of them looked up. None dared look toward the main house. The mistress descended last. Servants rushed to hold the umbrella above her head, though the wind howled and tore at it. She walked slowly, deliberately, like a queen returning to her throne. The boy followed behind, his chains clinking softly in the night. As they entered the house, the warmth hit him, not comforting warmth, but heavy, suffocating heat. The air smelled of old wood, smoke, and something faintly sweet, like burnt sugar in decay. The floors creaked beneath their feet. Paintings lined the hallway, portraits of pale, stern-faced ancestors staring down like silent judges. "Welcome to Hawthorne House," the mistress said calmly. "This is where you'll stay now, forever." Her voice lingered on that last word like a promise, or a curse. The butler, a tall man with hollow eyes, approached her. He whispered something the boy couldn't hear. She nodded once, slowly, then turned her head toward him. "Take him to the east wing. The small room. He stays close." The butler hesitated. Just a flicker, but it was enough to notice. His throat bobbed as if swallowing something bitter. "Yes, mistress." As they walked down the corridor, the boy glanced at the other servants. Their faces were blank, their eyes carefully averted, but there was something else in their expressions too, something buried. Fear. At the foot of the staircase, a door creaked somewhere deep in the house. A faint whisper rode through the hallway, too soft to understand but enough to make his skin crawl. The butler tightened his grip on the boy's arm. "Don't wander at night," he muttered under his breath so low only the boy could hear. "And don't listen if she calls from the hall." The boy froze. What? But the butler didn't explain. He just led him toward a narrow, dim corridor that seemed to stretch forever. The house groaned with every gust of wind. Candles flickered weakly, and somewhere, deep behind one of those walls, a door slammed. The mistress watched from the shadows at the top of the staircase. She didn't move. She didn't blink. Her eyes followed him like a predator marking its prey. The boy's small steps echoed through the hall. He didn't know it yet, but every hallway, every creak, every locked door in that house had a story, and all of them ended the same way. The plantation house was far too big to ever feel truly quiet. Even when no one was talking, the air carried sounds, the slow creak of wooden beams, the distant clatter of pots, and the faint rustle of skirts moving through shadowed corridors. It was in this house, beneath its high ceilings and behind its heavy doors, that rumors began to crawl like insects in the night. The boy, pale as the moon, with eyes too bright to belong in the fields, had been brought inside. That alone was enough to spark whispers. No slave boy ever crossed the threshold of the mistress's private quarters. The kitchen staff, mostly older women who had seen decades of suffering here, exchanged cautious glances as they prepared the mistress's evening meal. They spoke in half sentences, afraid the walls might hear. "Have you seen him?" one whispered, her hands busy kneading dough. "Ain't right. Ain't natural," another muttered, her voice low and shaky. "She brought him in," the first said, "like some kind of prize." Their voices trembled not out of cruelty toward the boy, but because they understood what it meant to be chosen. To be chosen by the mistress was not mercy. It was a different kind of cage. Upstairs, the boy sat at the edge of a massive carved wooden bed, his thin fingers tracing the fabric of the quilt. Everything felt foreign, the polished floor, the tall mirror, the scent of perfume heavy in the air. He didn't belong here. His entire life had been spent in the fields and auction yards, where the ground was dirt and the air was filled with sweat and commands. But now, in this suffocating silence, he felt more trapped than ever. From outside the bedroom, footsteps approached slowly. Not heavy boots, soft, deliberate steps like someone who moved through this house without fear. A maid appeared at the door. She was young, but her eyes carried years of quiet suffering. She didn't meet the boy's gaze at first. She only spoke in a hushed, almost rehearsed tone. She doesn't like noise," the maid said, folding her hands nervously. "When she enters, you keep your head down. Don't speak unless she tells you to." The boy nodded weakly. He wanted to ask why him, why the mistress had chosen him when no one else would. But the maid turned quickly, as if lingering too long near him might cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. Down the corridor, laughter echoed, a deep, throaty laugh that made the boy's skin prickle. It wasn't joyful laughter. It was the sound of someone who enjoyed control. And everyone in the house knew when the mistress laughed, someone was usually about to suffer. As night fell, candles burned low in their sconces, and the house settled into its eerie rhythm. Whispers flowed like water through the servants' quarters. Some said the mistress had chosen the boy because he was pale like her favorite porcelain doll. Others swore they'd seen her keep strange objects in her locked cabinet, objects not meant for prayers or kindness. And some whispered things they didn't even dare repeat out loud. The boy overheard fragments through the vents and cracks in the floorboards.
Like the others.
She keeps them close, never the same after. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough to feel fear coiling tight in his stomach. He wrapped his arms around his knees and listened to the night breathe through the house. At the far end of the corridor, behind closed doors, the mistress prepared herself. In front of her mirror, she brushed her hair slowly, humming a melody that didn't belong to any church hymn. She had waited a long time for someone who would fit perfectly into her twisted world. And now she believed she'd found him. Downstairs, the whispers grew sharper. The staff knew the boy's presence would change the rhythm of the house. It always did, and none of those changes ever ended with kindness. The boy didn't sleep that night. He stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds between creaks, waiting for the sound of her footsteps. He didn't know it yet. But in this house, whispers had power. They carried warnings, secrets, and the weight of those who had come before him, and never escaped. Morning came not with the warmth of sunlight, but with the coldness of routine. The boy awoke to the sound of the same soft footsteps that had warned him the night before. The maid, eyes lowered, entered silently with a folded set of plain clothes, not the ragged fabric of the fields, but stiff linen, too clean, too strange on his skin. She didn't speak much, just set the clothes down on the chair and whispered, "She'll come soon. You must listen carefully." The boy's pulse quickened. Moments later, the door opened with a slow, deliberate creak, and there she was, the mistress. She filled the doorway with an imposing presence. Not just because of her size, but because she carried herself like someone who owned everything her eyes touched. Her dress was a heavy shade of dark green, trimmed with black lace, and a jeweled brooch rested at her throat like a mark of power. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. "Stand," she ordered. Her voice was smooth and heavy like syrup coating something bitter. The boy obeyed, rising from the bed, his body stiff and uncertain. She walked closer, her cane tapping against the wooden floor, her gaze raking over him like she was inspecting a new piece of furniture. Her breath smelled faintly of spiced liquor, and when she finally spoke again, the words felt carved from ice. "You are mine now," she said. "But my house is not like the fields. Here, there are rules." She paced slowly in front of him, each tap of her cane making his chest tighten a little more. "Rule number 1, she began. "You will never speak unless I speak to you first. I do not like noise, and your voice will only exist when I allow it." She leaned in closer, her face inches from his, her eyes gleaming with something dark and cold. "Rule number 2, your eyes do not meet mine unless I ask you to look. Your gaze stays low. Always." The boy swallowed hard. "Rule number 3, she continued, her tone growing almost sing-song. "When the bell rings, you come to me. No matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, you come. Do you understand?" He nodded, too scared to speak. The mistress's hand shot forward, gripping his chin with surprising strength. "I said," she whispered, voice dropping low, "do you understand?" "Yes." The boy breathed out. She released him and straightened herself, satisfied. "Good." "Rule number 4, she went on. "You do not touch anything in this house without permission. Every object, every piece of furniture, every door belongs to me, including you." She stepped back, her cane tapping the floor again, her shadow stretching long in the room's pale light. "And rule number 5, she said, letting the silence stretch before finishing. You will not run. Not to the fields. Not to the staff. Not to anyone. If you do, I'll find you. And when I do, it won't be pleasant. The boy's hands trembled at his sides. He didn't need her to explain what would happen. The weight of her voice was enough. The mistress walked to the window and gazed out at the plantation, fields of cotton glimmering faintly under the weak sun. "You're different," she said softly, almost to herself. "They didn't want you because of how you look. But I see something in you. Something special. Something useful." She turned back, her smile thin and unsettling. "You will learn my ways, little ghost. And if you obey me, this house will be your world." A bell rang somewhere deep in the house. Instinctively, the boy froze. The mistress smirked, watching the way fear shaped his movements. "Good," she said. "You'll learn fast." She glided out of the room without looking back, leaving behind only the scent of her perfume and the echo of her rules. Once she was gone, the boy exhaled for the first time in what felt like minutes. The maid reappeared, eyes still avoiding his. "Don't make her angry," she whispered, her voice barely a thread. "She remembers everything. Every mistake. Every breath you take." The boy clutched the linen clothes to his chest, feeling the weight of the invisible chains tightening around him. This house wasn't a home. It was a maze of rules, each designed to make sure he never forgot who held the power. As the bell echoed again from somewhere below, he understood that every step he took from now on would belong to her. Night fell on the plantation like a heavy curtain, thick, dark, and suffocating. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes every breath sound like a scream. Outside, the wind slid through the trees, rattling the old shutters. Inside, the boy sat on the edge of his narrow bed, still wearing the stiff linen clothes the mistress had chosen for him. A bell rang. It was a low, drawn-out sound, echoing through the hallways like a slow heartbeat. His entire body went cold. She had told him about the bell. "When the bell rings, you come to me, no matter where you are." His hands trembled as he stood, bare feet on the wooden floor. The boards creaked beneath him like they, too, were warning him not to go. But obedience was not a choice here. It was survival. He opened the door and stepped into the hallway. A faint golden light flickered from lanterns hanging at intervals, but most of the corridor remained swallowed in darkness. He could hear distant movements, or maybe they were just the house itself groaning with age. The walls seemed to close in as he walked. Downstairs in the grand parlor, the mistress sat alone. The room was dim except for a single oil lamp beside her. She wore a silk robe, its deep crimson fabric pooling around her like spilled blood. Her hair was undone, cascading over her shoulders, giving her an almost predatory softness. She looked up the moment he entered, and that faint smile appeared, the kind that never reached her eyes. "You came quickly," she purred. "Good boy." He stood silently at the threshold, lowering his eyes as she had instructed. "Closer," she said. He obeyed, stepping forward until the tips of his toes touched the edge of the rug beneath her chair. She lifted a delicate porcelain teacup, took a slow sip, then set it down with care. "Tonight," she said, "you will learn what it means to serve in my house. There is no rest until I say so. There is no refusal. Only obedience," he nodded. "Good," she whispered. "Now, pour the tea." On the small table beside her was a pot of steaming tea. He moved toward it, his hands shaking. The cup rattled slightly as he lifted it, but he steadied himself. He poured carefully, silently begging the cup not to spill. When he handed it to her, she took it without thanks, watching him the whole time, like a hawk watches a rabbit. "On your knees," she said. His breath caught, but he sank down. The rug was soft, but the weight pressing down on him wasn't physical. It was her eyes, her presence, her ownership. She leaned forward, her face just above his. "Look at me. Rule number 2, never look unless she asks." So he did. Her gaze was unblinking. "Do you know why no one wanted you?" she asked softly. "Because they saw weakness, fear, a curse. But Her voice thinned into a whisper. "I see something else. I see a vessel." He didn't understand, but the word made the air feel colder. She straightened and took another slow sip of tea. You will not eat unless I allow it. You will not sleep unless I say so. You will not speak, not even to the others, unless given permission. Every breath you take is a gift from me. He lowered his eyes again, feeling that invisible chain tighten around his neck. The mistress tilted her head, studying him. Fear keeps you quiet, she said. I like that. But fear alone is not enough. You must learn to belong to me. She reached forward and lifted a small chain from the table. It gleamed faintly in the light, delicate but strong. At the end of it was a thin silver ring, not meant for beauty, but for control. She fastened it around his wrist. This, she said, is your reminder. If you ever run, if you ever disobey, I will know. Her fingers brushed against his skin, not gently, not cruelly, but deliberately. It made his stomach twist. Now, she said in a voice that slipped like smoke. Say it. His throat tightened. Say what? He whispered. Say that you belong to me. Every part of him wanted to resist, to fight, to scream. But resistance didn't exist in this house, not yet. I belong to you, he whispered. She smiled wide this time, teeth catching the light. Good boy. She stood towering over him, then walked toward the large staircase. You will sleep when the house sleeps, she said. But remember, I don't sleep much. With that, she disappeared into the shadows of the upper hall. The boy remained kneeling, staring at the flickering oil lamp, his chest rising and falling too fast. The chain on his wrist felt heavier than iron. He heard the distant sounds of the night, the creak of wood, the whisper of wind, the low moan of something moving through the halls. He didn't know if it was real or just the house itself breathing. When he finally rose and walked back to his small room, he understood that this was no ordinary mistress, and no ordinary house. This was a place where fear lived in every corner, where obedience wasn't a rule, it was survival, and tonight was only the beginning. The night air was thick with rain, drumming softly on the plantation roof like thousands of fingers tapping out a warning. Thunder rolled across the sky, low and slow, like some distant creature waking from sleep. The house was almost completely dark. Only a single lantern burned in the main hallway, its light trembling on the wooden walls. The boy lay on his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep had become impossible since that first night. The mistress's voice, her cold fingers, her rules, they hung in the air like cobwebs he couldn't brush away. Every corner of this house whispered, every wall remembered, and then it happened. A sound, a faint metallic click echoed through the hallway. It wasn't the bell. It wasn't the wind. It was something different. A door unlocking. He sat up, heart hammering. His room's small window gave him no comfort. The storm outside was as hostile as what lurked inside. But something about that sound called to him, like a rope pulling a drowning man. Quietly, he swung his legs over the side of the bed and tiptoed to the door. The hallway beyond was cold, and the floorboards groaned beneath each step. The lantern's dying light cast long, trembling shadows on the walls, stretching like claws. Down the hallway, where the corridor turned toward the back of the house, he saw it. The door. The one everyone whispered about. The one the mistress warned him to stay away from. The forbidden wing. It was slightly open. The lock hung loose on the latch, as though the house itself had decided to invite him in. He swallowed hard, his pulse thudding in his ears. Some doors are not meant to be opened, boy. Her voice replayed in his head, but curiosity was louder than fear now. He approached the door slowly, pressing his hand against the cool wood. It was heavier than it looked. As he pushed it open, a long, cold draft spilled out, like the breath of something that hadn't exhaled in years. Inside was darkness. Real darkness. The kind that swallows light whole. He grabbed a candle from the hall and lit it with a shaky hand. The flame trembled, but it was enough. The hallway beyond the door stretched long and narrow, with peeling wallpaper and warped floorboards. Cobwebs clung to the corners. The air was colder here, as if the warmth of the living never touched this place. On the walls were framed portraits. Not of noble families or plantation gatherings, no. These were portraits of children, dozens of them, each face stared out pale and hollow. And every single one of them had albinism. White hair, pale eyes, skin like paper. He moved down the hall one step at a time, his breath quickening. Beneath each portrait was a small brass plaque. Dates, names, ages. Some were as young as 6. Some no names at all, just numbers. His stomach twisted. These weren't just faces. They were his reflection, repeated again and again. At the end of the hallway was a door painted black. Unlike the others, this one was locked with a heavy chain, but beneath it a faint glow flickered, like firelight struggling to escape. He crouched low and peered through a crack at the bottom. What he saw made his skin crawl. Inside, there were iron chains bolted into the floor. A circle was carved into the wooden boards, marked with symbols he didn't understand. In the center sat a wooden chair, stained dark, not with paint. The boy stumbled back, his hand clapping over his mouth to keep from making a sound. Behind him, the portraits seemed to lean closer, their painted eyes alive with something that wasn't entirely gone. The air grew colder. The flame of his candle flickered wildly, and then he heard footsteps, slow, heavy, familiar. The Mistress. His breath caught in his throat. He spun toward the end of the hall. The main door creaked open wider as she appeared, silhouetted by the hallway lantern. She wasn't running. She didn't need to. Her steps were deliberate, as if she already knew exactly where he was. "Well," she said softly. Her voice slid through the dark like a blade. "Curiosity. How dangerous it can be." She walked forward, the hem of her robe dragging across the floor. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp, gleaming with a dangerous kind of pleasure. "I warned you," she said almost tenderly. "Didn't I?" The boy backed against the wall, clutching the candle. Her smile widened. "This wing doesn't belong to the living, boy. It belongs to what I keep." She stepped close enough for him to feel her breath against his face. "Do you know why I bought you?" "Why no one else wanted you?" He didn't answer. Couldn't. She leaned in, whispering, "Because they saw a curse, but I see power." She blew out his candle. Darkness swallowed them both. For a long, silent moment he felt her presence, close, breathing, like a predator waiting to strike. Then, without warning, she turned and walked back toward the main hall. "Come to me at dawn," she said over her shoulder, "if you value your life." And then she was gone. He stood there alone in the darkness of the forbidden wing, surrounded by painted ghosts and locked secrets. His heart pounded against his ribs. He knew deep down that this house was more than cruel. It was hungry, and he had just walked straight into its mouth. The rain had not stopped since the night he stepped into the forbidden wing. It fell in relentless sheets, slapping the windows like a hand demanding to be let in. The plantation house moaned beneath the weight of the storm. But inside his room, it wasn't the rain that kept him awake. It was the silence, the unnatural, almost listening silence. He lay on his narrow bed, the chain on his wrist pressing against his skin. He hadn't spoken to anyone since the Mistress caught him in the forbidden hallway. She didn't punish him. She didn't need to. The way she looked at him, like she now owned even the breath in his lungs, was punishment enough. A gust of wind pushed at the shutters. The candle on the table flickered once, then twice, and then the room grew colder, as if the storm itself had crept inside. That's when he heard it. A whisper. Soft at first. So soft that he thought it was just the storm playing tricks on him. But then another whisper joined, then another, layering over one another like dry leaves rustling in a dark forest. He sat up slowly, heart pounding. "Who's there?" he whispered. The room didn't answer with words. It answered with breath. Cold air brushed against the back of his neck. The whispers grew louder, forming broken fragments of sentences. "It burns. Oh, she took everything. Don't let her." The boy's hands shook as he reached for the candle. But before he could steady the flame, the light died, snuffed out by something unseen. Darkness wrapped around him, thick and absolute. Then, slowly, they began to appear. Faint, pale shapes emerged from the corners of the room. Small figures, children. Their skin was ghostly white, hair like frost, eyes hollow but knowing. Some wore torn linen clothes. Others wore nothing but the shadows they carried with them. The air filled with a deep, low hum, a sound too human to be the wind and too inhuman to be alive. One of them stepped closer. A girl no older than 10. Her lips didn't move, but her voice echoed inside his head. "We were like you." He pressed back against the wall, trying to breathe. "Who are you?" Another boy stepped forward. His neck bore faint bruises, his wrists marked with burns. "She called us chosen. She said our blood could feed the night." Their whispers layered into a chorus, overlapping and sinking deep into the room. "We trusted her. We burned." We screamed, and no one came. The boy clutched his chest. He wanted to cover his ears, but the voices weren't in the air. They were inside him. The little girl lifted her hand and pointed, not at him, but toward the forbidden wing beyond the wall. He could feel it, the weight of that hallway pressing against his thoughts. "The final night is coming," she whispered. "She will take your skin, your blood, your breath. Like she took ours." A cold tear slid down his cheek. His breaths came faster, shallower. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't fight her." The little girl's expression did not change, but something in her gaze softened. "Then you will die like us." The room pulsed with that single sentence. "Do like us, do like us," the chorus repeated until it sounded like the walls were chanting. Then one figure moved closer than the rest, a tall boy with a scar splitting his lip. His face was pale but fierce, like someone who died fighting. "But you can end it." His voice rang out like a drumbeat in the storm. "She grows weaker when fire touches the house. She fears what she can't control." He remembered the black door, the blood-stained floor, the symbols carved into the wood. "She'll kill me before I can escape," he whispered, barely audible. "She killed us too." The words hit him like a stone to the chest. And then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the children began to fade, their shapes blurred, their whispers fraying into the storm. But their last words lingered, sharp and unshakable. "The full moon." She waits for the full moon. The final ritual. The room fell silent again, but it was a silence filled with their echoes. The boy sat motionless, his knees pulled close to his chest. The candle remained dead, and the chain on his wrist felt heavier than ever. But now, beneath the fear, something else stirred. Something cold and steady. Resolve. He whispered to himself, almost like a promise, "She won't have me." Outside, the thunder cracked, as if the sky itself had heard him. The night began with silence. But it didn't last long. A strange pressure filled the air, thick like smoke even before the flames appeared. The moon was veiled behind heavy black clouds, as if it refused to witness what was about to happen. In the distance, a single lantern flickered, and then died. Inside the estate, the walls seemed to breathe, each creak louder than the last. A faint hum rose from beneath the floorboards, almost like the whisper of 100 forgotten voices. It was the same sound she had heard before, on the night her life had changed forever. But tonight, it felt closer, hungrier. Then it happened. A flash, sharp, bright, violent. The eastern wing ignited like dry bone catching a spark. The fire spread unnaturally fast, licking the stone walls like a living beast. The flames didn't burn with normal light. They glowed a deep, haunting crimson, as if they carried centuries of rage. She stumbled into the corridor, choking on the thick smoke, her nightgown sticking to her skin. Servants screamed somewhere below, their voices drowned by the roaring inferno. But the mistress did not run. She stood on the grand staircase, her black dress flowing like a shadow against the red. "Do not fear the fire," the mistress whispered, her voice calm and cruel. "It is not here to destroy, it is here to awaken." The girl's pulse pounded in her ears. The portraits on the walls began to melt, faces twisting into grotesque smiles. She reached for the banister only to flinch back, hot, burning. The heat was unbearable, yet the mistress walked through it untouched, like a queen commanding her kingdom of flames. The forbidden wing roared open with a thunderous crack. For years that door had remained sealed, but the fire had no respect for rules. Behind it lay the hidden truth, the source of the whispers. The girl's body moved before her mind could stop it, drawn by an invisible pull. Inside, the air was colder despite the burning around. A single figure stood in the center of the room, cloaked in ash and shadow. The mistress bowed her head to it. "It has begun," she murmured. The figure turned slowly. Its face was pale as bone, its eyes black pits of nothingness. When it spoke, the room shook. "The blood has answered. The house remembers." Suddenly, the floor beneath them split like a wound tearing open. Flames surged upward in spirals, wrapping the girl like fiery chains. She screamed, but no sound came out, only smoke. She could feel something ancient clawing into her soul, branding her, and then silence. The fire stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The estate still burned, but not a single ember touched the mistress or the figure. The girl collapsed to the ground, trembling. Her wrists burned with strange symbols, dark, curling marks that pulsed like living veins. The mistress knelt beside her, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "You cannot run anymore," she said softly. "You belong to the house now." Outside, the sky bled red as the first tower crumbled. But inside, something far more terrifying had awakened. The fire was not just destruction, it was a ritual, and she had just become its chosen offering. The fire had consumed everything it touched, yet the night was far from over. Ash rained down like black snow, swirling in the wind, coating the once grand estate in a shroud of death. The sky was still bleeding a dull crimson, and the air carried the bitter taste of burnt wood. And something else, something older. The girl awoke to silence. The flames had retreated, but their heat lingered like a memory. Her wrists ached. Those strange blackened marks still pulsed faintly, as if alive beneath her skin. The floor around her was scorched, yet where she had lain, the stone remained untouched, protected, claimed. Across the ruined hall, the mistress stood upon a blackened step, untouched by the destruction. Her gown flowed like a shadow-made flesh, her eyes gleaming with cold triumph. She didn't look like a woman anymore. She looked like a monument to something wicked. "It is done," she whispered to the wind. "The house has chosen." The figure from the forbidden wing remained behind her, a towering shape of smoke and bone, its presence bending the air. The girl tried to crawl back, but the ash beneath her hands hissed and burned. It was useless. There was no outside anymore. There was only the house. The mistress descended the steps slowly, each movement deliberate, regal. "Do you feel it?" she asked, kneeling beside the girl. "The fire has spoken your name. You have been marked. You are bound to it now. To me." The girl shook her head, tears streaking through the soot on her face. "I didn't choose this." "No one ever does," the mistress said softly, almost gently. "But the house does not ask for choices. It demands oaths." The shadows seemed to lean closer, listening. The cracked walls groaned like a living beast breathing in the dark. The figure extended a hand, a skeletal, ash-covered hand, toward her. A voice deeper than thunder filled the hall. "Swear or burn." Her heartbeat was a drum. The air tightened around her chest. In that single moment she saw flashes, not memories but promises. Faces she didn't know, flames she didn't light, blood she hadn't spilled. The house was showing her its history and its price. If she refused, the fire would consume what was left of her soul. But if she accepted, she would never belong to the world outside again. Her hands trembled. "What happens if I swear?" The mistress tilted her head, her smile both beautiful and terrifying. "Then you will rise from the ashes, not as a guest, but as a keeper. You will serve the house. You will serve me. And you will never die, never die." The words echoed like a curse. The girl lifted her burned wrists. The marks began to glow faintly like dying embers awakening. She closed her eyes. "One breath, one choice. I swear," she whispered. The figure's hand touched her forehead. Fire roared, not around her this time, but inside her. Her veins turned molten. Her screams were swallowed by the house. The ground shook as the oath carved itself into the stone beneath her, lines of fire etching a sigil into the floor. When it was over, she lay there, shaking, gasping, but alive. The marks on her wrists were no longer black. They shimmered like gold forged in darkness. The mistress leaned close, her voice a venomous lullaby. "Welcome home, little ember." The figure dissolved into smoke, retreating into the burned walls, but its presence remained, a silent promise of what she now belonged to. Outside, The last tower fell. The night was quiet again, but the house was awake. She stood slowly. Her fear was still there, but something else had taken root beneath it. Power. It coursed through her like fire beneath her skin. The girl who had arrived was gone. In her place stood the keeper of ash. Dawn never truly came. The horizon wore a pale, bruised light, neither day nor night, casting the world in a strange, ghostly hue. Smoke curled upward in slow spirals, like the house itself was exhaling after a long and terrible feast. The once grand estate was nothing more than a skeleton of blackened beams and scorched stone. But beneath the ruin, something ancient had awakened. She stood barefoot on the cold floor, the wind slicing through the gaps where walls once stood. The gold fire marks around her wrists shimmered faintly in the grey light. Her breathing was steady now, not the trembling breaths of a frightened girl, but the quiet rhythm of someone who belonged. The mistress stood at the far end of the ruined hall, her silhouette framed by rising smoke. Her gown flowed like liquid darkness, every thread a whisper of power. And though her body bore no wound from the inferno, her eyes burned with something far more dangerous: possession. "You've crossed the threshold," the mistress said softly. Her voice wasn't cruel this time. It was reverent. "The house accepts you." The girl, no, the keeper, lifted her head slowly. The fire no longer frightened her. The ash no longer suffocated. It obeyed. Tiny flecks of soot swirled around her ankles like moths drawn to their queen. She felt them, the voices she had once feared. But now they didn't scream. They whispered, in her name. The mistress approached, stopping just a few feet away. "Do you understand what you've become?" "I am what the house made me," she replied. Her voice, once fragile, now carried weight. A shadow crossed the mistress's face. Pride and something else, unease. This was no longer a servant kneeling in fear. This was something new. "You will keep this place," the mistress said. "You will bind the restless, feed the fire when it hungers. Obey the house," the keeper tilted her head. "And if the house obeys me?" The question hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. The mistress blinked just once, but it was enough. A storm of embers rose around the keeper, twisting and burning with silent fury. For the first time, the mistress took a step back. "You were chosen to serve," she hissed. The keeper's lips curved into a quiet, dangerous smile, and every fire outgrows its spark. The ground beneath them rumbled, a deep sound that seemed to come from the bones of the house itself. The massive blackened beams creaked, the walls shuddering like they were waking from a long sleep. The sigils on the floor burned to life, casting crimson light over their faces. The mistress raised a hand, trying to reclaim control, but the ash refused her. It swirled to the keeper instead, gathering around her body like a cloak of living smoke. Her hair lifted in the heat, her eyes burned gold. In that instant, the balance shifted. The house no longer belonged to the mistress, it belonged to its keeper. The mistress let out a low, venomous laugh. "You think you've won, but this house doesn't love, it devours." "Then let it try," the keeper whispered. The wind roared through the hall. A surge of fire erupted beneath their feet, but this time it didn't consume the keeper. It bowed to her. The mistress screamed as the flames wrapped around her, not as punishment but as release. Her body melted into smoke, her last words a whisper lost in the roar. The house fell silent. Ash drifted down gently, settling around the keeper like a crown of ruin. She stood alone now, alone, but not powerless. The walls pulsed faintly. The house recognized her. It was in her blood. Her heartbeat was its heartbeat. She stepped through the broken doorframe, the grey sky yawning before her. There was no plantation anymore. No chains, no masters. Just the keeper, and the power she carried. Behind her the house groaned, a sound both alive and eternal. It would rebuild itself, brick by brick, shadow by shadow, because its keeper would make it so, and somewhere deep inside those blackened halls, the voices whispered her name like a prayer. "Keeper, keeper, keeper." She turned once, her golden eyes catching the last curl of smoke. A cruel world had tried to erase her. A monstrous house had tried to own her. But she had risen from its ashes. The fire didn't consume her. She became the fire fade to black.